As we go a little deeper today, we're going to touch a subject that we've broached in different ways over the last few months, and that is God's will. But particularly what Father Peter is going to help us on this journey is God's perfect will. Hi, Father Peter.
RJ, good to be with you.
Pleasure. So today's topic, I think we could we could go down a number of roads with it, but at a high level, let's talk today about God's perfect will.
Okay, so the God's will or God's perfect will. I was asking a question, and my sister told me this story. Padre Pio, the stigmatist, miracle worker, performed so many miracles of healing and things for people. And he would show up around the world and just profound spirituality, just a good and holy man. He had a friend in the monastery, so it was another brother. And I think he actually, they no longer lived in the same monastery, but his friend came to him. He had this heart disease, and he said, the doctors want me to have an operation. Should I have the operation? He says, they tell me that I'm going to die or, whatever. Should I have the operation? And Padre Pio says to his friend, have the operation and you'll live. After he's prayed and the Lord has told him, have the operation and you'll live. So the brother had the operation and died. And Padre Pio himself was like, wait a minute. And we'll get back to that, or remind me of that in a little while. So he died, and they're mourning or whatever, and they're preparing, and they had of him preparing his body, putting him in, his habit and all that kind of thing. 3 days, he sits up. Exactly, he sits up, and he's talking to them. So it actually happened, have the operation and you'll live. And then he goes on to live into his 90s.
Really?
Yeah. And so he says, they want to know what happened. And he said, so I died and and I see Jesus and I'm talking to Jesus. And he says, you can stay here. And it's probably not the way it is in heaven, because the things of God are very different, but it's sort of like almost like levels, or you could imagine it like sort of floors or whatever, kind of thing. And he said, you can stay here, and this is where you've done a good job, you've been a good man. He goes, but you did not do my perfect will. Or you could go back to earth and do my perfect will. And not only will you rise, but you'll be a beautiful influence on this many more people. And obviously, because he sat up, after being dead, that he chose to go back and do God's perfect will. That story, I think, haunts those of us who have heard that story. So we look and we say we want to do God's will, and we know that God's will is about keeping the commandments. It's about praying. It's about being faithful. All of these kinds of things that we can imagine or we think of. But then when you put in that doing God's perfect will, what does that mean to do God's perfect will? And the good that God means to bring about in the world because we're doing His will, it's a different thing. Yeah.
We had a homily today. Of course, it's the feast of St. Thomas Didymus, and there's that backstory about Thomas, right? Where Thomas was pretty gung ho about Christ, right? He was, and when he believed at the time before the resurrection that Christ was here to really become king, right? It wasn't okay, I'll be a king amongst you, but rather put rings on my finger, a crown on my head, give him a scepter and rule the world. And when that didn't happen, boy, it didn't fit Thomas's plan. And Thomas had spent all this time planning what he was going to do and how he was going to move the kingdom forward and ensure that that happened. But obviously, he was throwing a curveball.
Just before the Passion, Jesus says, I'm going up to Jerusalem. Thomas is trying to encourage the other ones. He says, let's go die with him. We'll go up to die with him. And it makes you wonder if he really was using an expression, let's go die with him, like, let's go fight the forces that need to be fought. Let's overcome the things that need to be overcome. And now he's going to establish his kingdom and we're going to reign. Yeah. We're going to be these lieutenants or generals or whatever you want to say. We're going to do that. And totally crushed. He's got to be totally crushed, because when we see him, in today's gospel, we see him, I'm not going to believe. They're telling him that they've seen Jesus. He's risen. I'm not going to believe unless I put my finger in his hand and my hand in his side. And
there's so much about Thomas's weakness that we should draw from, right? I mean, it's one of the first stories I remember when I began to recognize, the difference between God wanting us to prepare and our desire to plan.
Yeah,
He does want us to prepare.
Yeah, so He does want us to prepare for whatever, and that's why he told them, I'm going up to Jerusalem where I'm going to suffer, die, and then I'll rise again. How many different times he said, this is what will happen, that I'll be put to death by the chief priests and elders of the people and all that kind of thing, that this is what, and so they heard it, but they couldn't
Not at all.
figure out how all the pieces fit together.
Yeah.
It's almost like all the prophecies about Jesus before he's born, they're, some say there are about 20 significant prophecies, but then there could be hundreds of other prophecies going way back in the scriptures. And they all are true. But how do you put that together? How do you put that Rubik's Cube, to make it all line up? It's infinitely more complicated than how we would solve the puzzle. So Thomas has solved it in his mind in a particular way. We do the same thing. Right? I'm guilty of that all the time, where I have this natural ability or instinct to prepare, and I think God is always blessing that, saying prepare. But He's always correcting me, like, but don't plan. Do not plan. Your plans are going to come to nothing. And we see that in Thomas's life. Like, whatever you're thinking, I want you to prepare. I want to tell you to do this. So you should have courage. You should have wisdom. Pray, so that you're not overwhelmed, and on and on and on. You have to prepare. And for me, it would be like you told me a while ago with your girls when COVID was first coming. You're saying to them, I want you to have $1,000 on hand. Beautiful. Like, just saying, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if the ATMs are going to shut down, or you're going to need something to pay for food or transportation in the last quarter. We could come up with a, right?
Sure.
Like,
as a
father,
why.
you could come and say, this is just one of the things, it's good to be prepared. Yes. On the other hand, it could be for any number of those things, for food, for transportation, for whatever. Or it could be the Lord saying, yes, I want you to have $1,000 so that you could give it away to somebody. And that might be just, wait a minute, I never thought, Lord, that you wanted me to get, that's what I was preparing for.
Is it, my view, we have to listen with an ear that is focused on doing God's perfect will. It's different than especially if you're an A-type personality like I am, where the tendency is to want to control the outcome, right? I assess, okay, I understand that I'm going to go in and say, this is how we're supposed to fight this battle. But that's not the ear that I should listen with. The ear I need to listen with is understanding God's will, God's perfect will in that preparation. Right. And when I try to put my planning on top of it, not going to happen.
Right. So you have particular gifts. I have particular gifts. So I do the same thing when it comes to the parish. Like, God willing, if I got moved to another parish, I'm like, I kind of have, I know what to do. You know, these are the things that you kind of do to make it work. Like if somebody said, okay, here's a restaurant or a chain of restaurants or whatever, make it work. You're like, okay, I can do that, you know, kind of thing. And so it's sort of like what we've accumulated, the experience and the wisdom and the knowledge that we've accumulated so far in our lives is an asset to us in order to accomplish certain things. And yet it also might be a liability, because
Absolutely.
when it comes to God's will, we imagine ourselves the guy in charge, if not the lieutenant, the major, the general, who I have a master plan, and this is how, and I get frustrated with people who aren't following my plan and making this happen, whether it's in a parish or whether it's in a company.
Yeah, you brought up the restaurant business, and I'll tell you, there are a lot of great chefs out there that will not hire an apprentice that comes with any experience because they come with baggage, right?
Yeah.
So the way a particular Middle Eastern chef wants a broth to be created, a bone broth to be created, whatever, it may be different than what I've been doing for the last 40 years.
Right.
And they don't want to unwind that.
Right.
And whereas, you know, the good news is our Lord, our God, is willing to put up with us, but that doesn't mean we get to make the broth the way we want to make the broth. He's still going to take us
this
down
is,
there.
I think, you know, you and I have gone through periods in my life, and probably going through one now, where I have these ideas, but then I say to God in prayer, I say to him, I want your perfect will, because I'm hearing this beautiful story of how much more good God can do in the world if I follow his plan rather than follow my plan, or what I think is right and good or whatever. To a certain extent, what I think is right and good, but it's still my plan.
Yeah.
So if I say to God, I want your perfect, and that's why, you know, often people use that expression of God's perfect will rather than just God's will. His perfect will sort of eliminates more and more of me and increases more and more of God. You know, so we talk about that happening perfectly, you know, kind of thing. It's sort of like Jesus saying, you must be perfected. We say, well, I can't be perfect, but you have to be perfected. Like, you have to be on that way. And so it works with God's will, where he's saying, if God says, I want you to do my will, and we say, what I want is your perfect will. God, do with me whatever you want. And God says, great. First thing I have to do is unteach all of those, like your example of how to make the broth. Like, but I know how to make. No, you don't. You don't. Just assume you know nothing.
Yes, clean the vessel.
Clean the vessel. If you want a glass of sparkling clean water, my living water, first clean the glass. First step is clean the glass. Well, I'm the only one. No. You're going to do what I tell you, or you're not going to do what I tell you.
And I think you and I both could talk about our own situations, our personal stories where that's happened to us in different ways. And we don't, I don't think you ever go through any type of purification, and as you enter, you think, boy, this is really what I was hoping for. Right?
Yeah, yay!
Not so much. But having come out of those in the past,
right.
You could never say, well, I think I could have done that better.
Correct.
You just,
and you don't, and going through it, you say, nor could we honestly look into ourselves and say, oh yeah, that's how I would have done it. No, that's not how I would have done it. I would have said, okay, I'll keep this, I'll keep this, I'll keep this, and we'll just go from there. This understanding, these skills, this whatever. And if God says to you, no, the first place, and I love bringing this up to people, like the first place is humility, and then repentance, and then I might be able to do something with you, you know, kind of thing. But you have to always go back, because I want to teach you a different way. And this situation calls for this. And say, well, we have this recipe, or we have this plan. No. This is what I'm going to do here today. This is different than what I've done there.
The closest lay example I have that is just this tiny, tiny example was a relationship Nancy and I had with an architect. He was a good friend of the family, and we wanted to make some changes to our home. We wanted to make 2 rooms feel like they've kind of flowed together. I'm not an architect. I had no idea. I just knew that I needed somebody with a very creative mind to do that. So what we did is his name is Richard. We met with Richard and we said, look, at a high level, this is what our hope is, that the end result is. Have at it, right? You have at it. What he came back with was nothing shy of brilliant. I never would have been able to like the elements. I loved every one of them, but never would I have put those together in a million years. And because we are not great at being able to even comprehend the Lord's will, certainly His perfect will. But I think sometimes for all of us, it's good to just think of those examples where somebody is able to do something outside of our own skill sets that has bearing.
Right.
I have to go back to or to Padre Pio on his reaction. So his brother says, should I have the surgery? And he says, yes, you should go ahead. And then he dies.
And then he dies, and you can imagine Padre Pio, and that's what I said, it reminded me of that. Like Padre Pio going before the Lord and saying, didn't see that. I thought you said if he had the operation, he would live.
Yes.
What am I missing? Oh, wait 3 days. I'll bring him back from the dead. Yeah. And of course, he's done it before. Not only himself, but Lazarus. And how many other people? Oh, he's dead. The child is dead. You can't do anything. He says, oh, she's just sleeping. Kind of thing. I've got another. But, we talk about, foolishly we talk about thinking outside the box. And we're just talking outside of this box, inside another box, where God is the one who's like, you want to talk about outside the box? Here, somebody who's dead brought back to life again. Wow. Kind of thing, wow. It even surprised Padre Pio.
And imagine the work that priest did.
Into his, you're the man who came back to life again. Man, you wake up and every morning and you just say, I woke up. What are you going to tell people? I don't know that you have to tell them all that much.
Yeah.
I'm the guy who woke up after 3 days of being dead.
Yeah. One of the conversations you and I had that I think started us down this particular path was happiness. We've talked about joy, but happiness. And I had made the comment to you. You'd asked me how I was doing. I said I'm happy, and I am. I think if I'm just really transparent. That is deeply rooted in recognizing my limitations, but my acceptance of just wanting to do the Lord's will. And for an A-type personality, which, no surprise.
And imagine your life is like, I always think of this when I would go to Florida, and in my young days, go to the beach and sit there, and occasionally they would have the wasn't necessarily a competition, but I'd walk, and I'd walk along the beach, and I'd walk for maybe a couple of miles or more, and I'd come across these sand sculptures, and I would look at them and I'd say, doesn't the guy understand that the wind, the rain, the tides, this is all going to be gone, but whoever has created these things has done like just a remarkable job, and they've created something beautiful. But it's not in watercolor, it's not in oils, it's not in stone or wood even, kind of thing. It's in sand. Mm-hmm. And I think that's sort of the thing for us, like where God says, do this for me. And we almost have to have that mentality of the sand sculptor who says, if the Lord is asking me to do something, I don't care if it lasts for a few hours or if it lasts longer. It's not how long this lasts, it's that it's bringing delight and joy and beauty to something that otherwise wouldn't be there. It wouldn't have that joy or beauty or whatever. And it's the exercise of doing it, kind of thing. And If you have that kind of mentality, then it's different. And I'm just wondering out loud, like if somebody works in sand, if they could also do it in something else, but
Like
they
a more
choose
permanent
a
medium?
more permanent medium. Yeah, but they choose the sand, kind of thing, or they take delight in the sand, kind of thing, because it's just gone.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think of that in cities sometimes where there are a couple of street artists in Boston that do the chalk,
Murals, yeah.
the murals, and they're stunning,
Right.
absolutely stunning. But to your point, first good rain,
Yeah.
yeah,
Right.
your work is gone.
Yeah.
They don't. That's not their concern. I've never thought about it that way.
Yeah.
Back to doing God's will and seeing those opportunities. Something I do think about is he gives us these very short windows sometimes where he pushes us through a door. And clearly he wants us to do something.
So did he just push us through a window or through a door? But anyway,
You adore me a window.
There was a window of opportunity to push you out.
Yeah, you get the door.
Yeah, okay.
Not me, not so much.
You get the window.
Yes, most of the time. But he puts us in these situations to do his will. And I can remember being a younger man and wanting to see that through fruition. I wanted to see it come out the back end. That if I helped somebody, what was the final product? I wanted to know that and you don't.
Yeah.
You don't. You just do. You do what God asks you to do. You help somebody, and chances are really good. Never going to know anything else.
I was reading a comedian, and he goes, the real comedian, the guy who's really committed, is the guy who will send a barber chair randomly to someone in India. Because you just imagine them uncrating the barber chair, saying, "What is this? And what do I do with it?" And he's on the other side of the world just laughing.
Yes.
I did that.
Yes.
I made that joke, and I don't care if anybody ever gets it, but I brought that, just that quirkiness to the world.
But it is that willingness on our part to be able to accept that it is not the outcome that you and I seek, right? And just accept that you're doing his will.
Even St. Paul will say, I plant the seed, another encourages growth, and another will harvest it.
Hallelujah.
Kind of thing. It's like that we trust that God is doing something beautiful. Even if it's a sand sculpture, people will walk away from having walked by it. I think that's what the artist understands. They will have walked by, seen something beautiful, and were amazed or moved, in their soul, sort of just said, wow. And that is the result, rather than the doing something amazing in sand. But that's the result that they're really trying to accomplish. And I think that gets closer to God and his kingdom, which is the flowers, come up, and then in a few days they're gone. I think of that every year. We have this patch of poppies. They come, and in a few days they're gone. But they're there. We have that bed, and they're there. But it's 2 days. They're gorgeous, but you could miss them like that. But it accomplishes the will of God because it brings beauty. And of course, the beautiful thing about God is that he just does that a million times over and over and
All
over
the time.
and over, kind
All
of
the
thing.
time.
So, yeah.
Great to chat with you.
Thank you.
So rarely do I feel that when you finish a conversation, the words that we talk about all the time and bring together are so applicable, and that is trust in God.